They say kindness costs nothing, but for Maria Johnson, it cost her everything, or so she thought. A waitress in an upscale Atlanta restaurant doing her best to provide for her daughter, Maria didn't hesitate when a customer needed help. She didn't know it was Morgan Freeman, and she didn't know that her simple act of kindness would cost her the job she desperately needed. The next day she was fired, confused, and heartbroken. Maria believed her world had come crashing down. She had lost everything. But sometimes the things that break us open are the very things that lead us to something better. The sun cast long golden shadows across the polished floors of the Meridian, one of Atlanta's most prestigious restaurants. Maria Johnson moved with practiced grace between the tables, balancing plates with the precision that came from years of experience. At 34, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her dark skin glowing under the restaurant's soft lighting, her curly hair pulled back into a neat bun that professional standards demanded. "Here you are, sir. The seared salmon with asparagus," Maria said, placing the artfully arranged plate before an older gentleman. "Can I get you anything else?" "This looks perfect, thank you," the man replied with a smile. Maria nodded, her warm, brown eyes crinkling at the corners. She had mastered the art of making each guest feel like they were her only concern, a skill that had earned her the best section of the restaurant and the loyal clientele who often requested her by name. What none of them knew was that behind her flawless service lay a life of careful calculation. Every tip was mentally allocated before it even landed in her apron. $20 toward Zoe's dance lessons, $35 for the electricity bill that was already past due, $50 tucked away for emergencies that seemed to arise with alarming frequency. "Maria," whispered Tanya, another server who hurried past with a tray of drinks. "Table 12 just got seated in your section. Looks like someone important." James put him in the corner booth. Maria glanced toward the secluded corner where James, the maitre d', was pulling out a chair for a man wearing a simple navy cap pulled low over his face. There was something familiar about the way he carried himself, a quiet dignity that seemed to command the space around him without effort. "I'll be right there," Maria replied, quickly checking her other tables before making her way to the corner booth. As she approached, she caught a glimpse of the man's face as he looked up briefly to thank James. Her step faltered for just a second. Even partially obscured by the cap, there was no mistaking those distinctive features, the kind eyes and that iconic profile she had seen countless times on screen. Morgan Freeman. Maria took a steadying breath. In her 7 years at the Meridian, she'd served celebrities before. Atlanta attracted its share of film productions and visiting dignitaries. The management had a strict policy: treat them exactly like any other guest. No autographs, no photos, no special attention that might make them uncomfortable. "Good evening, sir," Maria said, approaching the table with a professional smile, giving no indication she recognized him. "Welcome to the Meridian. My name is Maria, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. May I start you with something to drink?" Morgan looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a warm appreciation that told her he'd noticed her discretion. "Thank you, Maria," he said, his voice that unmistakable deep timbre that had narrated so many stories. "I'd love a glass of sparkling water with lime, and perhaps your recommendation for dinner." "The Chilean sea bass is exceptional tonight," Maria replied, maintaining her composure. "Chef Martin prepares it with a lemon herb crust that's become something of a signature." "That sounds perfect," Morgan nodded. "I'll trust your judgment." As Maria turned to put in his order, she noticed a group of 4 men being seated at a table nearby. They were loud, already showing signs of having had drinks elsewhere, their boisterous laughter cutting through the restaurant's subdued atmosphere. She made a mental note to keep an eye on them. The evening progressed smoothly. Maria checked on Morgan periodically, making sure he had everything he needed while respecting his privacy. He seemed content, enjoying his meal in solitude, occasionally jotting notes in a small leather-bound notebook. It was nearly 9 when the first disruption occurred. The group of men had grown progressively louder, their voices carrying across the restaurant as they ordered their 3rd round of drinks. Maria noticed other patrons casting annoyed glances in their direction. "I'm telling you, man, I've seen him in something," one of the men said, his voice carrying. "That guy in the corner." Maria tensed as she approached Morgan's table with coffee. "Would you care for dessert this evening?" she asked, positioning herself subtly to block the men's view. Morgan looked up, a hint of concern crossing his features as he became aware of the attention. "Just the check would be fine, thank you." Before Maria could respond, one of the men from the loud table stood up, swaying slightly as he pointed toward Morgan. "Hey, it's that actor, right? The one who's in all those movies." Maria stepped forward, her voice low but firm. "Sir, I'll be with your table in just a moment. Please return to your seat." The man ignored her, taking a few steps toward Morgan's table. "Come on, man, what's your name? I know I've seen you somewhere." Morgan kept his gaze down, clearly uncomfortable with the unwanted attention. Other diners were now watching the scene unfold, the pleasant hum of conversation dimming. "Sir," Maria said more firmly, stepping directly into the man's path, "I need you to return to your table right now." "What's your problem?" the man slurred, looking down at Maria with narrowed eyes. "I just want to talk to the guy." "Our guests, to value their privacy," Maria replied evenly. "Please respect that and return to your seat." By now the man's friends had joined him, forming a small semicircle that was drawing even more attention. "Come on, just one picture," another man said, pulling out his phone. "It'll take 2 seconds." Maria stood her ground. "Gentlemen, I'm going to have to insist you return to your table, or I'll need to ask the manager to escort you out." "Who do you think you are?" the first man said, his tone turning ugly. "You don't tell me what to do. You're just a waitress." The words stung, but Maria didn't flinch. "Sir, at the Meridian we respect all our guests' right to dine in peace. Please return to your table now." The tension in the air was palpable. From the corner of her eye, Maria could see James heading toward them, but he was on the other side of the restaurant. "Move aside," the man said, attempting to step around her. Without hesitation, Maria shifted, once again blocking his path. "No, sir, I won't do that." The man's face darkened with anger. He leaned in close, his breath heavy with alcohol. "You know what? I'm going to speak to your manager. Let's see how long you keep this job when he hears how you're treating paying customers." "That won't be necessary," came Morgan Freeman's voice, calm and authoritative as he stood up. "The lady is doing her job and doing it well. I'd appreciate it if you gentlemen would enjoy the rest of your evening at your own table." There was a moment of stunned silence as recognition dawned on the men's faces. "Holy shit, it is you." One of them said, "Morgan Freeman." By now James had arrived with the restaurant's security guard. "Gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." As the men were escorted out, muttering protests and casting backward glances, Maria turned to Morgan. "I'm so sorry about that, sir." "Don't be," Morgan replied, his eyes kind. "You handled that with remarkable grace. Thank you for stepping in when you didn't have to." "It's my job to ensure all our guests have a pleasant experience," Maria said, simply. Morgan smiled, a warm, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Well, you do your job with integrity. That's rare these days." After Morgan left, leaving a generous tip that would cover Zoe's overdue school activity fees, Maria continued her shift as usual. She noticed Edward Pierce, the restaurant manager, watching her from across the room, his expression unreadable. As she drove home that night to her small apartment where the babysitter waited with a sleeping Zoe, Maria felt a quiet satisfaction. She had done the right thing, standing up for someone who needed it, famous or not. In a world that often seemed coldly transactional, she had chosen kindness and respect. She had no way of knowing that this simple act would change the course of her life forever. The next morning, Maria received a call from the restaurant. Edward. Pierce wanted to see her in his office before her shift. As she hung up, a flutter of unease passed through her. In her experience, early morning meetings with management rarely brought good news. Little did she know, as she kissed her daughter goodbye and promised to be home in time for dinner, that by this time tomorrow, everything would be different. The morning air was crisp as Maria made her way to the Meridian. She'd woken up earlier than usual, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach since receiving Edward Pierce's call. 7 years at the restaurant had taught her to read between the lines of management's carefully neutral tones. Pulling her jacket tighter against the autumn chill, Maria checked her watch. 6:45, 15 minutes early for her meeting with Edward. The restaurant stood silent and empty, a stark contrast to the bustling energy that filled it each evening. Only the soft glow of lights from the back office indicated anyone was inside. "Come in, Maria," Edward called when she knocked on his partially open door. He sat behind his polished mahogany desk, his expression carefully composed. At 45, Edward Pierce ran the Meridian with methodical precision, treating the restaurant like a finely calibrated machine where every component had its specific function. "Good morning, Edward," Maria said, taking the seat across from him. She kept her voice steady, her posture straight, showing none of the apprehension coursing through her. Edward folded his hands on the desk. "I'll get straight to the point. We need to discuss what happened last night with Mr. Freeman." Maria nodded. "Those gentlemen were disturbing his dinner. I was simply maintaining our policy about celebrity guests' privacy." "That's one interpretation," Edward said, his tone cooling. "Another is that you created a scene in our dining room, a scene that made other patrons uncomfortable." "I was trying to prevent a scene," Maria countered, feeling the first stirrings of dread. Edward shook his head. "You inserted yourself into a situation that should have been handled by management. James was already on his way over. You overstepped your boundaries, Maria." The accusation stung. "I was doing my job, protecting our guests' dining experience." "Your job," Edward said sharply, "is to serve food and beverages, not to confront customers. Those men were paying guests too. They were harassing another guest," Maria said, struggling to keep her voice level. "I couldn't just stand by and—" "That's exactly what you should have done," Edward interrupted. "Stand by, smile politely, and wait for management to handle it. That's protocol." Maria stared at him, disbelief washing over her. "So I should have let them disturb Mr. Freeman until you or James could make it across the restaurant?" Edward's expression hardened. "What you should have done is follow the chain of command. This isn't the first time you've taken matters into your own hands, Maria. You've been warned about this before." His words hit her like a physical blow. The incident 6 months ago, when she'd comped a meal for an elderly couple whose anniversary. Dinner had been ruined by a kitchen error. Edward had reprimanded her then for overextending her authority. "Edward," Maria said quietly, "I've worked here for 7 years. My customers request me specifically. I've never had a complaint filed against me." "This isn't about your service record," he replied. "It's about respecting the restaurant's hierarchy and procedures." Maria felt a chill creeping through her veins. "What are you saying?" Edward sighed, a practiced sound of regret that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm saying that the Meridian no longer requires your services, effective immediately." The words hung in the air between them. "You're firing me," Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "For protecting a guest from harassment? I'm terminating your employment for repeatedly disregarding protocol and management authority," Edward corrected, sliding a document across the desk. "Your final paycheck will include 2 weeks' severance. I'll need you to sign this." Maria stared at the paper, the words blurring before her eyes. This couldn't be happening. Not over something like this. Not when Zoe's school fees were due next week. Not when their health insurance came through this job. "This isn't right," she said, her hands trembling slightly. "I did nothing wrong." "It's not about right or wrong, Maria. It's about following procedure." Edward's tone was final. "You can clean out your locker now. I'd prefer if you used the back entrance." The humiliation burned as Maria walked numbly to the staff area. The morning crew was arriving, casting curious glances as she emptied her locker. 7 years of employment fitting into one small bag. Tanya found her there, eyes widening in shock. "Maria, what's happening?" "I've been fired," Maria said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "What, why?" Tanya gasped. "For standing up to those men who were bothering Morgan Freeman last night." Tanya's expression shifted from shock to outrage. "That's insane. You were doing the right thing." Maria attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Apparently doing the right thing isn't in my job description." "This is wrong," Tanya said, lowering her voice as another server walked by. "We should all protest. Talk to Edward." "Don't." Maria cut her off. "I appreciate it, but I don't want anyone else losing their job." She knew Tanya was a single mother too. Slinging her bag over her shoulder, Maria took one last look around the staff room where she'd spent countless hours over the years. Then she walked out the back door into the alley behind the Meridian, a door she'd used thousands of times, but never quite like this. The drive home passed in a blur, reality setting in with each mile. She was unemployed. In today's economy, with restaurants closing left and right, finding another serving position would be next to impossible, especially one that paid what the Meridian had. Entering her empty apartment, Zoe already dropped off at school, Maria set her bag down and sank onto the couch. For the first time since Edward's words, she allowed the tears to come hot and angry. After allowing herself exactly 5 minutes to cry, Maria wiped her eyes and pulled out her laptop. She couldn't afford the luxury of self-pity, not with Zoe, depending on her. She began searching job listings, sending emails and updating her resume. By 3 o'clock, she'd applied to 17 positions and received 3 automated rejections. The remaining silence felt just as damning. How would she tell Zoe? Her daughter was perceptive beyond her 10 years. She'd know something was wrong the moment she saw Maria's face. Maria glanced at the stack of bills on the counter. Rent due. In 2 weeks, electricity already with a late notice. Zoe's dance recital costume payment pending. Her savings would cover perhaps a month if they were extremely careful. As if on cue, her phone pinged with a text from Zoe's dance instructor. Reminder, final costume payment due Friday, $120. Maria closed her eyes briefly. One act of kindness, one moment of standing up for what was right. And now everything was falling apart. The sound of her phone ringing startled her. Unknown number. Probably a recruiter, she thought hopefully, reaching for it with trembling fingers. Hello? She answered, forcing steadiness into her voice. The response was the last thing she expected, a deep, distinctive voice that she immediately recognized. Is this Maria Johnson? This is Morgan Freeman calling. Is this Maria Johnson? This is Morgan Freeman calling. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She gripped the phone tighter, certain she had misheard. Hello? The voice prompted again, that unmistakable rich timbre impossible to confuse with anyone else's. Yes, Maria finally managed, her voice small. This is Maria. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time, Morgan Freeman continued. I wanted to speak with you about what happened last night at the Meridian. Maria sank deeper into her couch, mind racing. How had he gotten her number? Why was he calling? It's fine, she said, trying to sound composed despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. I actually have the day unexpectedly free. There was a slight pause before Morgan spoke again. I heard about what happened, that you were let go this morning. Maria closed her eyes, embarrassment washing over her. The great Morgan Freeman knew she'd been fired. The humiliation felt even more acute now. News travels fast in this city, she said, attempting a light tone that fell flat. Too fast sometimes, Morgan agreed. Listen, Maria, I'd like to meet with you if that's possible. What happened wasn't right, and I feel somewhat responsible. You're not responsible at all, Maria said quickly. I made my own choice. A choice to help me, Morgan pointed out, and I'd like to return the favor if you'll allow it. Could you meet me at the Four Seasons downtown in about an hour? I'm staying there while I'm in Atlanta. Maria glanced down, at her simple jeans and sweater, then at the clock. Zoe wouldn't be home from school for 3 more hours. Yes, she said, surprising herself with the immediacy of her answer. I can be there. Excellent, Morgan replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Ask for me at the front desk. They'll direct you to where we can talk privately. After hanging up, Maria sat motionless for several moments, trying to process what had just happened. Morgan Freeman had called her. Morgan Freeman wanted to meet with her. It seemed surreal, like a dream that would dissolve if examined too closely. Shaking herself from her daze, Maria hurried to change clothes. She settled on her one good interview outfit, black slacks, a burgundy blouse, and the only blazer she owned. Professional but not pretentious. She didn't want to look desperate, even if that's exactly how she felt. She called Zoe's after-school program to make sure they could keep her daughter until 6 if needed, then texted her neighbor Diane, who had agreed to take Zoe in emergencies. Possible. Job lead. Might be late picking up Zoe. Can you get her at 6 if needed? Diane's reply came quickly. Of course. Good luck. The drive downtown took longer than expected, Atlanta's midday traffic clogging the highways. Maria gripped the steering wheel, anxiety building with each passing minute. What could Morgan Freeman possibly want? Was this about compensation for getting her fired, or perhaps a character reference for another restaurant? The Four Seasons loomed ahead, its sleek glass exterior reflecting the afternoon sun. Maria handed her keys to the valet, wincing at the cost she couldn't really afford, and straightened her blazer before walking through the revolving doors into the lobby. The opulence was immediate and overwhelming. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, staff in immaculate uniforms. Maria approached the reception desk, suddenly acutely aware of her worn shoes and the small chip on her manicure. "I'm here to see Morgan Freeman," she said quietly to the receptionist, half expecting to be laughed at or escorted out. Instead, the young woman smiled professionally. "Ms. Johnson, yes, Mr. Freeman is expecting you. Please follow Marcus to the executive lounge." A uniformed attendant materialized at her side, guiding her through the lobby to a private elevator. Everything about the hotel spoke of a world Maria had only glimpsed from the server's side of the table, a world of casual luxury where people's whims became other people's commands. The executive lounge occupied the hotel's top floor, offering panoramic views of the Atlanta skyline. Morgan Freeman sat at a table near the windows, dressed casually in a light blue button-down shirt and khakis. He rose when he saw her, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Maria, thank you for coming on such short notice." His handshake was firm and reassuring. Up close, his presence was even more commanding than it had been in the dimly lit restaurant, a natural gravitas that no amount of acting training could fabricate. "Please, have a seat," he gestured to the chair across from him. "Would you like something to drink, coffee, tea?" "Coffee would be nice," Maria replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Black, please." Morgan nodded to a nearby attendant who disappeared to fulfill the request. When they were alone again, he turned his full attention to her. "I want to apologize for what happened," he began. "I've spoken with the restaurant owner, not just the manager, but the actual owner. Edward Pierce overstepped his authority in firing you." Maria blinked in surprise. "You spoke with Mr. Daniels." "I did," Morgan confirmed. "Thomas Daniels and I go back many years. He was not pleased to hear how his establishment treated someone who was simply doing their job with integrity." The attendant returned with Maria's coffee and a fresh cup for Morgan, before discreetly withdrawing again. "Mr. Freeman," Maria began. "Morgan, please," he corrected gently. "Morgan," she amended, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "I appreciate your concern, but you didn't have to do that. What's done is done." Morgan studied her for a moment. "Tell me, Maria, how long had you worked at the Meridian?" 7 years, she replied. "And in those 7 years, did you ever receive any formal reprimands? Poor performance reviews?" Maria shook her head. "No, I've always been one of their top servers." "That's what Thomas told me," Morgan nodded. "So a dedicated employee of 7 years is fired for what? Protecting a guest from harassment. That doesn't sit right with me." Maria sipped her coffee, unsure how to respond. "It doesn't sit right with me either, but restaurants can be political. Edward never liked that customers would request me specifically." Morgan leaned forward slightly. "Maria, I didn't ask you here just to apologize. I wanted to talk to you about an opportunity." Maria's heart rate quickened. "An opportunity?" "I'm in Atlanta filming for the next 6 months," Morgan explained. "I'm executive producing a new series about community resilience in the face of adversity. We're telling real stories about real people." He paused, his eyes holding hers. "I need an assistant, someone with excellent judgment, integrity, and people skills. Someone who can help coordinate between our production team and the communities we're featuring." Maria stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "And you want me?" Morgan smiled. "What I saw last night was someone who stands up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Someone who handles tense situations with grace and dignity." That's exactly the kind of person I need on my team. But I don't have any experience in film production, Maria protested, her mind whirling. I'm a waitress. You're much more than that, Morgan countered. Experience can be gained, character is innate. I can teach you the industry. I can't teach someone to have the qualities you already possess. He reached into a leather portfolio and slid a document across the table. This is an outline of what the position would entail, along with the salary and benefits package. Maria glanced down at the paper, and her eyes widened at the figure listed. It was nearly 3 times what she made at the Meridian. This is very generous, she managed, her throat tight. It's market rate for the position, Morgan said simply. The film industry compensates fairly for the long hours and dedication required. Maria looked up from the paper, meeting his gaze. Why? Why? Would you do this for someone you don't even know? Morgan's expression softened. Because 20 years ago, someone took a chance on me when I needed it most. Sometimes, Maria, the universe puts us exactly where we need to be to help someone else find their path. As the Atlanta skyline gleamed, beyond the windows, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. The weightless sensation of possibility opening before her, a door she never knew existed suddenly standing ajar. I'd like to think about it, she said finally. This is a lot to process, Morgan nodded, understanding in his eyes. Of course, take the weekend. My number is on that paper. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that what you did last night mattered. Maria left the Four Seasons in a daze, the valet bringing her car around as if she was someone important. The document from Morgan Freeman sat in her purse, feeling almost electric in its potential to change everything. Maria's apartment felt different when she returned from the Four Seasons, smaller somehow, as if her meeting with Morgan Freeman had expanded her world and shrank everything else by comparison. The document he'd given her lay open on the kitchen table, the salary figure still making her breath catch each time she looked at it. Mom, you're home early! Zoe burst through the door at 3:45, her backpack bouncing against her small frame. Diane, the neighbor who'd picked her up, waved from the doorway. Joe Bleed go okay? Diane asked, curiosity evident in her expression. Maria nodded. I think so. Thank you for getting Zoe. After Diane left, Zoe dropped her backpack and fixed her mother with that perceptive stare that seemed too knowing for a 10-year-old. What happened with your work, Mom? Mrs. Pierce called Kelly today and said her dad had to fire someone. Maria winced. Edward Pierce's daughter was in Zoe's class, something she'd always navigated carefully. She sat on the couch and patted the space beside her. Come here, baby. As Zoe settled next to her, Maria chose her words carefully. I did lose my job at the Meridian. Mr. Pierce and I disagreed about how to handle a situation with a customer. Was it because of that actor? Kelly said her dad was mad about some actor. Maria sighed. Sometimes Atlanta felt impossibly small. Yes, it involved a famous actor who was dining at the restaurant. Some other customers were bothering him, and I stepped in to help. Mr. Pierce thought I should have handled it differently. Zoe's brow furrowed. Did you do something wrong? No, Maria said firmly. I did what I thought was right. Sometimes adults disagree about the right thing to do, and when one adult is the boss, they get to make the final decision. Zoe seemed to consider this. So what are we going to do now? Will we have to move? The question stabbed at Maria's heart. They'd had to move twice in Zoe's younger years when finances got tight. She'd promised her daughter stability, a promise she'd kept for 3 years now. Actually, Maria began slowly, the actor I helped was Morgan Freeman. Do you know who that is? Zoe's eyes widened. The man with the voice, from the Penguin movie? Maria smiled. That's him. Well, he called me today. He offered me a job working with him on a TV show he's making in Atlanta. For real? Zoe bounced on the couch cushion. You're going to work in TV? Will you be famous? No, not famous, Maria laughed. I'd be his assistant, helping organize things behind the scenes. But it's a very good job, with better pay than the restaurant, so we don't have to move. Relief flooded Zoe's face. No moving, Maria confirmed. But I haven't said yes yet. I told him I need to think about it. Why? Isn't it better than your old job? Out of the mouths of babes. Maria considered how to explain the complexity of her hesitation to a child. "It's different from anything I've done before," she explained. "I know how to be a good server. I don't know if I'll be good at this new job, and if I'm not good at it, I could end up without any job at all." Zoe leaned against her mother's shoulder. "You're good at everything, Mum." Maria wrapped an arm around her daughter, heart swelling. "I wish that were true, sweet girl." After Zoe went to bed, Maria called her oldest friend, Tasha, who had moved to Los Angeles years ago to pursue makeup artistry in the film industry. "Morgan Freeman offered you a job?" Tasha's voice rose incredulously over the phone. "Girl, tell me you said yes on the spot." "I told him I needed to think about it," Maria admitted, curling up on her bed with her cell phone. "Think about what? This is a no-brainer," Maria sighed. "Tasha, I don't know the first thing about film production. What if I fail spectacularly and end up worse off than I am now?" "Listen to me," Tasha's voice turned serious. "The film industry is about who you know and who knows you. Morgan Freeman, Morgan freaking Freeman, knows you and thinks you're worth hiring. Do you have any idea how many doors that opens?" But nothing," Tasha interrupted. "You've been serving people for years. That job requires organization, memory, multitasking, conflict resolution, and endless patience. Those are exactly the skills a good assistant needs." Put that way, it made sense. Maria stared at the ceiling, considering. "What does the pay look like?" Tasha asked. Maria named the figure. "Holy sh..." Tasha whistled. "That's competitive even by LA standards. Maria, this is what we call a life-changing opportunity. These don't come around often." "I'm scared," Maria admitted in a small voice. "What if I don't belong in that world?" "Nobody belongs until they do," Tasha replied softly. "Remember when I first moved to LA? I cried every night for a month because I felt so out of place. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." After they hung up, Maria sat at her laptop, researching film production assistant roles until her eyes burned. She made lists of pros and cons, her practical nature demanding a logical approach to a decision that felt anything but logical. The next morning she took Zoe to the park, watching her daughter climb the jungle gym with fearless determination. Had she ever been that brave? That willing to reach for something without calculating every possible way she might fall? "Miss Johnson?" Maria turned to find Thomas Daniels, the owner of the Meridian, standing beside her bench. In his 70s, Daniels was rarely seen at the restaurant, leaving daily operations to Edward Pierce. "Mr. Daniels?" Maria stood, surprise and wariness mixing in her chest. "Please sit," he gestured to the bench. "I won't take much of your time. I wanted to personally apologize for what happened." Maria sat back down, watching Zoe from the corner of her eye. "Morgan said he spoke with you." "He did." Daniels nodded, lowering himself onto the bench with the careful movements of age. "Edward overstepped. I wanted you to know that I've reprimanded him and would be happy to reinstate you, with a raise and assurance that nothing like this happens again." The offer hung between them, a lifeline back to the familiar. 2 days ago, it would have seemed like a miracle. Now it felt strangely limiting. "That's very generous," Maria said carefully. "But you're considering Freeman's offer," Daniels finished for her, a knowing look in his faded blue eyes. Maria nodded, watching Zoe launch herself down the slide. "It's a big change. Change is terrifying," Daniels agreed. "When I opened the Meridian 30 years ago, I was so scared I couldn't sleep for a week. But not changing. That can be even more terrifying in the long run." He patted her hand with his weathered one. "For what it's worth, I think you'd excel in Freeman's world. You have a quality most people lack, genuine integrity. That translates in any industry." After he left, Maria called her sister in Chicago, then her mother in Savannah. Both conversations circled the same themes: excitement tinged with caution, encouragement tempered with practical questions. Sunday evening found Maria sitting at her kitchen table again, the document from Morgan Freeman before her, his number programmed into her phone. Zoe was already asleep, school clothes laid out for morning. Maria closed her eyes, visualizing 2 futures. In one, she returned to the Meridian, back to the familiar routine of serving others, the steady but limited income, the known constraints. and comforts. In the other, she stepped into an unfamiliar world, learned new skills, built new connections, showed Zoe that opportunities could appear in the most unexpected ways. Which path would make her prouder to look back on 10 years from? Now? The answer, when she allowed herself to admit it, was clear. With steady fingers, Maria dialed Morgan Freeman's number. He answered on the second ring. "Hello, Maria. Have you made a decision?" She took a deep breath, feeling the weight and the lightness of choice. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I'd like to accept your offer." "Excellent," Morgan replied, genuine pleasure in his tone. "Welcome to the team. We'll start tomorrow at 9, the production office on Peachtree Street. My driver will pick you up." As she hung up, Maria felt a curious sensation spreading through her chest, a feeling she recognized after a moment as pride. Not pride in achievement, but pride in possibility. Pride in choosing to believe she deserved more than what life had offered so far. She was terrified. She was exhilarated. She was ready. The sleek black SUV arrived at Maria's apartment complex precisely at 8:15 the next morning. She stood beside Zoe in the parking lot, her daughter bouncing with excitement as the vehicle pulled up. "Your chariot awaits," the driver said with a warm smile, stepping out to open the rear door. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a crisp uniform. "I'm Curtis. Mr. Freeman asked me to make sure you arrive comfortably." Maria smoothed her skirt, another piece from her limited professional wardrobe, and knelt to Zoe's level. "Remember, Mrs. Wilson will pick you up after school today. I might be home a little later than usual." "I know, Mom," Zoe said, rolling her eyes with the practiced exasperation of pre-adolescence. Then her expression softened. "You look pretty, like a business lady." Maria kissed her daughter's forehead. "Thank you, baby. Have a good day at school." As the SUV pulled away, Maria watched Zoe board her school bus through the tinted window. The simple morning routine she'd performed hundreds of times now felt momentous, the dividing line between her old life and whatever came next. "First day jitters?" Curtis asked, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Is it that obvious?" Maria asked with a small laugh. "Everyone feels it," he assured her. "I nearly threw up before my first day driving for Mr. Freeman 5 years ago. And now?" Curtis smiled. "Best job I've ever had. Mr. Freeman sees people, really sees them." The production office occupied the 10th floor of a gleaming high-rise in Midtown Atlanta. Maria's stomach tightened as the elevator climbed, each floor bringing her closer to a world she knew only through her research of the past weekend. The doors opened onto a bustling space that bore little resemblance to the quiet restaurant environment she was accustomed to. People hurried between glass-walled offices carrying coffee cups and tablets. Phones rang, conversations overlapped, and an energetic buzz permeated the air. "Maria!" Morgan Freeman's distinctive voice rose above the din as he approached from a corridor, hand extended. "Right on time. Come, let me introduce you to the team." What followed was a whirlwind of names and titles: producers, directors, writers, location scouts, researchers. Maria smiled and shook hands, struggling to commit each person to memory. Some greeted her warmly, others with the distracted politeness of people with too much on their minds. "And this is Vanessa Parker, our lead producer," Morgan said, introducing Maria to a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s. "Vanessa, this is Maria Johnson, my new personal assistant." Vanessa's handshake was brisk, her assessment quick. "Morgan speaks highly of you," she said, her tone suggesting this was both a compliment and a challenge. "We're on a tight schedule with this project. Have you worked in production before?" "No," Maria admitted, meeting the woman's gaze directly. "But I'm a fast learner." "You'll need to be," Vanessa replied, not unkindly. "Morgan, we need you in the writer's room in 5. They're struggling with the West Side Community episode." After Vanessa departed, Morgan led Maria to a small office adjacent to his larger one. "This is your space," he said, gesturing to a desk equipped with a sleek computer, phone, and tablet. "Everything you need should be here, but let me know if something's missing." Maria set her purse down, trying not to appear as overwhelmed as she felt. The office was twice the size of her bedroom at home. "I'm guessing this is all a bit much," Morgan said perceptively. Maria smiled ruefully. A bit different from carrying plates, yes? Today is about orientation, Morgan explained. Julie from HR will walk you through the administrative details, and then my previous assistant, David, will spend the afternoon showing you the systems we use. He's moving to our Los Angeles office next week. Before Morgan could continue, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it with a slight frown. Writer's room, I need to go. David will be here in about 20 minutes. He paused at the door. One piece of advice, Maria. Remember why I hired you. It wasn't for your production experience. It was for your judgment and integrity. Trust those instincts in everything. How you do here? After he left, Maria sat at her new desk, running her fingers over the smooth surface. This was real. This was happening. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tasha. First day. Crush it, girl. Julie from HR arrived moments later, armed with a stack of forms that required signatures and initials, benefits packages, confidentiality agreements, direct deposit forms, the administrative foundation of a job that offered health insurance. That would cover Zoe's asthma medication without the crippling co-pays Maria had struggled with. By the time David arrived, Maria had filled out enough paperwork to develop a hand cramp. So you're Morgan's new find, David said, assessing her with friendly curiosity. In his late 20s, with stylish glasses and an easy smile, he exuded the confidence of someone who knew his environment well. He has a knack for spotting talent in unexpected places. I'm not sure I qualify as talent yet, Maria replied honestly. David laughed. Honesty. Good start. Morgan values that above almost anything else. He pulled up a chair beside her. Ready for production assistant boot camp? The next 3 hours passed in a blur of information. David walked her through scheduling software, contact databases, communication protocols, and expense reporting systems. Maria took careful notes, grateful for the organizational skills she'd developed managing complex dinner services with dozens of moving parts. The most important part of this job, David explained, is anticipating needs before they're expressed. Morgan doesn't like asking for things twice, and he hates micromanaging. He expects you to figure out what needs doing and just do it. Like running a good service, Maria murmured. David looked at her quizzically. In restaurants, she explained, the best servers anticipate what guests need before they ask. A water refill, another napkin, the check. You learn to read situations. Understanding dawned in David's eyes. Exactly like that. Maybe you're more prepared for this than you think. At noon, David took her to the staff cafeteria, an amenity that made the Meridian's cramped break room look pitiful by comparison. As they collected their food, Maria noticed the hierarchies at play. Department heads clustered at certain tables, assistants at others, a subtle but unmistakable ordering that reminded her of restaurant staff dynamics. So why did you decide to move to LA? Maria asked as they found seats. My partner got a directing opportunity we couldn't pass up, David explained. Plus, after 3 years with Morgan, I'm ready to step up to a production coordinator role. He's supportive, wrote me an amazing recommendation. Maria nodded, absorbing this glimpse of potential career progression. Is he a good boss? The best I've had, David said without hesitation. Demanding but fair. He notices everything, good and bad. Do quality work, be honest, and you'll thrive. After lunch, Morgan summoned Maria to a meeting with community leaders from Atlanta's West Side neighborhoods, the focus of their first episode. She sat quietly in the corner, taking notes, watching Morgan navigate the complex social and political dynamics with genuine respect and interest. One woman, a community organizer named Layla Harris, spoke passionately about gentrification, threatening her neighborhood's cultural heritage. We need our stories told with dignity, not poverty tourism, she insisted, her gaze challenging. That's exactly why we're here, Morgan replied earnestly. This series isn't about celebrities parachuting in with solutions. It's about amplifying the voices and resilience already present in communities like yours. Maria watched Layla's skepticism soften slightly, noting how Morgan's sincerity created openings where defensiveness might otherwise prevail. It was a different kind of service than she was used to, but at its core, it still centered on human connection. By 5 o'clock, Maria's head was swimming with new information. She had a list of tasks for tomorrow, login credentials for 6 different systems, and a company phone with Morgan's direct line programmed as the first contact. As she gathered her things, Morgan appeared at her door. How was day 1? Overwhelming, Maria admitted, but good. I think I can do this, Morgan smiled. I know you can. Curtis is waiting to take you home. Tomorrow will be easier. Stepping back into her apartment that evening, Maria felt the contrast acutely. The small living room with its second-hand furniture seemed to belong to a different woman than the one who had sat in high-level meetings today. Mom! Zoe rushed to hug her. Did you meet famous people? Did you see cameras? Are you in the movie? Maria laughed, dropping her bag to lift her daughter in a tight embrace. It's a TV show, not a movie, and I'm working behind the scenes, not in front of cameras. But you met famous people. I met people who are working to tell important stories, Maria said carefully, already conscious of her new obligation to discretion. And I have so much to learn. Later, after Zoe was asleep, Maria sat at her kitchen table reviewing her notes from the day. The learning curve was steep, but not insurmountable. Her restaurant experience had taught her how to handle pressure, manage competing priorities, and navigate personalities, skills that seemed transferable to this new world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time in years, Maria felt something beyond the relentless pragmatism that had governed her choices. She felt possibility, not just for survival, but for growth. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Great first day. The Westside community leaders were impressed with your attentiveness. Vanessa Maria stared at the message, a small smile forming. Perhaps she could belong in this new world after all. 3 months into her role as Morgan Freeman's assistant, Maria had developed a rhythm that would have been unrecognizable to her former self. Her days now started with a 6:30 a.m. alarm, followed by a quick breakfast with Zoe, and then the now familiar pickup by Curtis in the production company SUV. Morning, Curtis, Maria said, sliding into the back seat with her leather portfolio, i.e., gift from Morgan after her first month. How's Elaine's back doing? Much better after those stretches you suggested, Curtis replied, pulling into traffic. The physical therapist was impressed she'd been doing them correctly. These small connections had become part of Maria's new normal. She now knew the names of crew members' children, remembered producers' coffee preferences, and could anticipate which community partners needed extra preparation before meetings. The skills that had made her an exceptional server, attention to detail, memory for preferences, and intuitive understanding of people's needs, had translated seamlessly to her new role. Mr. Freeman has the interview with Atlanta magazine at 10 Chihuahua, then the community center visit at 1 Geese, Curtis reminded her, though he knew Maria would have the entire schedule memorized. And the script review got pushed to 4K, Maria added. Vanessa needed more time with the writers. The production office hummed with the controlled chaos of a series in full production. As Maria walked through the main area, she exchanged quick greetings with the team members who had gradually accepted her as one of their own. Maria, Vanessa called, intercepting her path to Morgan's office. Do you have the revised community center schedule? Sending it now, Maria replied, already, tapping on her tablet. I added 15 minutes with Ms. Collins as you requested. She's bringing her grandson who survived the apartment fire last year. Vanessa nodded approvingly. Perfect. Morgan will want that human element for the resilience narrative. She lowered her voice slightly. Listen, Morgan mentioned you've been reviewing some of the early submissions for the second half of the season. Just preliminary screenings, Maria clarified, careful not to overstep, helping filter which stories align with the series vision before they reach his desk. Well, he values your perspective. Don't sell yourself short. The compliment warmed Maria as she continued to her office. 3 months ago, she would have dismissed such praise as mere politeness. Now she recognized it for what it was, hard-earned professional respect. Morgan was already at his desk when she entered with his morning tea, 1 honey, no milk, and the day's briefing materials. Morning, Maria, he said, looking up from the script he was annotating. Did you get a chance to look at those submissions from the East Side neighborhood? I did, Maria replied, setting down his tea. I've flagged 3 that I think align particularly well with our focus on community-led solutions. The story about the Urban Farm Collective seems especially promising. Morgan took a sip of his tea and nodded. I trust your judgment on this. You have a good sense for authentic narratives. The confidence he placed in her still occasionally took Maria by surprise. In these moments, she would think of Edward Pierce and his dismissal of her judgment at the Meridian. The contrast couldn't have been starker. The morning proceeded at its usual breakneck pace. Maria coordinated with the magazine journalist, prepared Morgan's talking points, and liaised with the community center to finalize security arrangements. By noon, she had resolved a catering crisis for the afternoon shoot and rescheduled a conflicting investor call without having to consult Morgan on either issue. You've become indispensable, Morgan commented as they drove to the community center. The team was skeptical at first. They always are with my unconventional hires, but you've won them over. Maria smiled. It's not so different from managing a restaurant section, just with higher stakes and better benefits. Morgan laughed. Then his expression grew more serious. I have a new challenge for you. The network executives are visiting. Next week to review our progress, I'd like you to present the community engagement strategy. Maria's breath caught. Present, to the network. Shouldn't Vanessa handle that? Vanessa will cover production timelines and budgets. But the community relationships, that's becoming your domain. You understand the importance of authentic representation better than most of our team with film school degrees. The community center visit unfolded smoothly, with Morgan connecting genuinely with residents, sharing stories of resilience after a devastating apartment complex fire. Maria observed from the sidelines, taking notes on moments that captured the essence of what their series aimed to portray. Miss Collins, an elderly woman who had saved 3 children during the fire, approached Maria as the crew was packing up. You work with Mr. Freeman? Yes, ma'am, Maria replied respectfully. I can tell he listens to you, Miss Collins said, her wise eyes evaluating Maria. Make sure our stories are told right. No sugarcoating, but no exploitation either. We're more than our tragedies. I promise, Maria said, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Back at the office, Maria found herself facing a crisis. One of the main participants for tomorrow's shoot had backed out, citing concerns about how their neighborhood would be portrayed. This is a disaster, Vanessa said, pacing Maria's office. We can't reschedule the entire shoot. The location permits alone cost thousands. Maria thought of Ms. Collins' words. Let me speak with them. You? Vanessa raised an eyebrow. I understand their concerns, Maria said firmly. They're worried about being portrayed as victims instead of agents of change. I can address that directly. Vanessa hesitated, then nodded. Make it happen. 30 minutes later, Maria sat in a small community center office facing Marcus Washington, the neighborhood association president who had pulled his support. We've had film crews here before, Marcus said, arms crossed defensively. They come, they get their poverty shots, they leave. Nothing changes except our neighborhood looks worse on TV. Maria nodded, not rushing to contradict him. That's a valid concern, Mr. Washington, and if that's what we were doing, I'd advise you to stay away. Surprise flickered across his face at her candor. But that's not what this series is about, Maria continued. This is about highlighting the solutions your community has created despite institutional neglect. It's about showing your agency, not your victimhood. Marcus studied her. That's a nice speech. Why should I believe it? Maria took a breath. 3 months ago, I was a waitress at the Meridian. I know what it's like to be seen as just your job title instead of a whole person. This project matters to me because it's giving voice to people who are usually spoken about, not spoken with. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. You're not what I expected. Neither is this project, Maria replied. Come tomorrow, see for yourself. If you're not comfortable with how things are proceeding, you can stop it on the spot. I give you my word. After a long moment, Marcus nodded. One chance. When Maria returned to the office with Marcus's signed consent form, Vanessa stared in disbelief. How did you pull that off? I listened to his concerns and didn't dismiss them, Maria said simply. Sometimes people just need to know they'll be respected. Later that evening, as Maria reviewed presentation materials for the network meeting, Morgan stopped by her office. Vanessa told me about the Washington situation, he said. Impressive work. Maria looked up from her computer. I just treated him the way I'd want to be treated. That's rarer than you might think in this business, Morgan said. You're doing more than rising to the challenges I've given you, Maria. You're creating your own path here. After Morgan left, Maria sat back in her chair, letting his words sink. 3 months ago, she'd been fired for standing up for what she believed was right. Now she was being praised for the same quality. Her phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Can we get pizza tonight? Mrs. Wilson says I did great on my history project. Maria smiled, texting back her agreement. No matter how much her professional life transformed, some things remained delightfully constant. As she gathered her things to leave, Maria noticed the stack of neighborhood story submissions waiting for her review. She slipped them into her bag. These were people's lives, their hopes and struggles captured on paper, waiting for someone to recognize their worth. Once, she had been the one waiting for recognition. Now she held the power to do the recognizing, and that responsibility felt like both a burden and a gift, one she was increasingly ready to bear. Maria had never felt more confident than when she finished her presentation to the network executives. The words had flowed naturally as she outlined their community engagement strategy, explaining how authentic representation benefited both the series and the neighborhoods they featured. When she concluded, the room broke into appreciative applause. Impressive work, Miss Johnson, said Diane Lawson, the network's head of programming. Your approach to community participation is refreshing. Most productions just parachute in, get their footage, and leave. That's exactly what we're trying to avoid, Maria replied, catching Morgan's approving nod from across the conference room. As the executives filed out, congratulations continued to flow. Vanessa squeezed her arm. High praise from the usually reserved producer. Even Philip Chen, the notoriously critical director of photography, offered a rare compliment. The afterglow of success carried Maria through the rest of the day. It wasn't until she was gathering her things to leave that she overheard the conversation drifting from the break room. Sure, she gives a good presentation, but let's be real, you'll know why she's here, said a male voice Maria recognized as belonging to Trevor Adams, one of the associate producers. What do you mean? Asked another staff member. Come on, Trevor continued, his voice lowering but still audible. Morgan finds her waiting tables, she gets fired, and suddenly she's his right-hand woman with zero experience. Connect the dots. That's inappropriate, Trevor, a female voice objected. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, Trevor replied defensively. Nobody goes from serving coffee to presenting to network execs in 3 months without something going on. Maria froze, the portfolio clutched tightly in her hands. The implication was unmistakable and cut deeper than she expected. She'd encountered her share of inappropriate comments as a server, but this felt different, more personally degrading, undermining the professional respect she'd worked so hard to earn. She quietly retreated to her office, shutting the door before sinking into her chair. Taking deep breaths, she tried to process what she'd heard. Was this what others thought too? Had her achievements been quietly dismissed as the result of an imagined impropriety? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Morgan stood in the doorway, his expression concerned. Everything all right? You left rather quickly after the presentation. Maria hesitated. The last thing she wanted was to appear as though she couldn't handle workplace dynamics or needed special protection. Just tired, she said finally. It was a big day. Morgan studied her for a moment, clearly unconvinced but respectful enough not to press further. You did exceptional work today. The network rarely approves additional funding after these reviews, but they've allocated another 100,000 for community engagement based largely on your presentation. The news should have thrilled her, but it felt tainted now. Thank you, she managed. That's wonderful news. After Morgan left, Maria gathered her things and texted Curtis that she was ready to leave. The ride home was silent. her mind replaying Trevor's words on endless loop. The next morning, Maria arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping to center herself before the day began. She was reviewing location permits when Vanessa appeared. At her door, coffee in hand. "You're here early," Vanessa observed, leaning against the doorframe. "Still riding high from yesterday's win?" "Something like that," Maria replied non-committally. Vanessa's perceptive gaze lingered. "Or maybe dealing with the aftermath of Trevor's big mouth." Maria's head snapped up. "You heard?" "Word travels fast," Vanessa said, stepping into the office and closing the door. "For what it's worth, Trevor's an insecure jerk who can't handle being outshone by someone without his fancy film school degree." "Is that what everyone thinks?" Maria asked, hating the vulnerability in her question, but needing to know. Vanessa sighed, taking a seat across from Maria. "Some might wonder. This industry runs on relationships and connections. People assume that's how everyone gets ahead." She leaned forward. "But those who've worked with you know better. You've earned your place here." While Vanessa's reassurance helped, the following days brought subtle changes Maria couldn't ignore. Conversations sometimes halted when she entered. Rooms. Certain team members avoided eye contact in meetings. Once she clearly heard someone whisper Freeman's favorite as she passed the editing suite. The culmination came during the weekly production meeting when Maria presented findings from community focus groups regarding the upcoming Southside neighborhood episode. The residents feel strongly that the gang violence narrative overshadows the educational initiatives, Maria began. "With all due respect," Trevor interrupted, "we need to consider viewer engagement. Redemption stories need conflict, and gang violence provides that tension. But if it misrepresents the community's reality," Maria countered, "are we making a documentary or entertainment?" Trevor challenged. "Some of us have been in this industry long enough to know what resonates with audiences." The subtle emphasis on experience wasn't lost on anyone. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. "What resonates," Morgan said, his authoritative voice breaking the tension, "is authenticity." Maria's community insights are valuable precisely because they help us avoid cliches that audiences are tired of seeing. The meeting continued, but Maria felt the dynamic had shifted. Morgan's defense, while appreciated, had also highlighted her status as needing protection, reinforcing the perception of favoritism. That evening she picked up Zoe from her friend's house, grateful for the normalcy of mommy duties after the day's tensions. "Mum, can Kelly sleep over Friday?" Zoe asked as they drove home. "Sure, baby. I think I can arrange to leave work a little early." "Awesome. I told her my mom works with Morgan Freeman and makes TV shows now, and she didn't believe me." Maria winced slightly. "Zoe, remember what we discussed about not talking too much about my job? But I'm proud of you," Zoe said simply. The innocent comment brought tears to Maria's eyes. While adults questioned her legitimacy, her daughter saw only achievement worth celebrating. At home, after Zoe was asleep, Maria called Tasha. "They think I slept my way into this job," she said without preamble, the words burning her throat. "Oh, honey," Tasha sighed. "Unfortunately, that's the go-to assumption when women advance quickly in entertainment. What do I do? I can't exactly confront everyone who whispers behind my back." "You outwork them," Tasha said firmly. "You become so undeniably good at your job that those whispers sound ridiculous even to the people spreading them." The next morning, Maria arrived at the office with renewed determination. She wouldn't let others' assumptions derail the opportunity she'd been given. Stepping into the break room for coffee, she found herself alone with Trevor. The tension was immediate, both of them suddenly very focused on stirring their beverages. "Your presentation to the network was good," Trevor said unexpectedly, not meeting her eyes. "The community angle, it was smart." The reluctant compliment surprised her. "Thank you." They worked in silence for another moment before Trevor spoke. Again, "Look, I may have said some things and I was out of line." It wasn't quite an apology, but Maria recognized the effort it took. "I've worked hard to learn this industry quickly," she said evenly. "I'd appreciate the chance to be judged on my contributions rather than assumptions about how I got here." Trevor nodded once, discomfort evident in his posture. It wasn't resolution, but it was acknowledgement. Later that day, Maria joined Morgan in his office to review the community feedback she'd compiled. "How you seem more yourself today," Morgan observed. Maria hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I've been dealing with some workplace dynamics, nothing I can't handle." Morgan studied her thoughtfully. "This industry can be cruelly dismissive of newcomers, especially those who don't arrive through traditional channels. But remember why I hired you, Maria. Your perspective is valuable precisely because it's different." "Thank you," Maria said, "but I need to navigate this on my own terms. I can't be seen as running to you with every conflict." Morgan nodded, respect evident in his expression. "Fair enough, but know this, your work speaks for itself. Eventually the naysayers will have no choice but to listen." As Maria left his office, she felt a renewed clarity. She couldn't control what others thought or said, but she could control her own actions and the quality of her work. The path ahead wouldn't be without obstacles, but she'd faced adversity before. This time, though, she wasn't fighting just to survive. She was fighting to thrive, to claim the space she deserved in this new world, and that made all the difference. The summer heat pressed down on Atlanta as Maria stepped from Curtis's air-conditioned SUV, smoothing her linen blazer. 4 months into her role, she now greeted the imposing glass production building with familiarity rather than intimidation. What once seemed impossibly foreign now felt like a second home. Her phone buzzed with a text from Morgan. "Running late. Community council meeting at 10. Can you handle without me?" 6 months ago, the prospect of representing Morgan Freeman at a meeting with community stakeholders would have terrified her. Today, she replied with a simple, "Of course, we'll brief you after." The lobby buzzed with activity as Maria made her way to the elevators. She nodded to familiar faces, exchanging quick greetings with crew members she now knew by name. "Maria," Vanessa called, rushing toward her with the focused intensity that characterized all her movements. "Good, I caught you. The Southside Community Center called. They're reconsidering their participation in episode 4. Maria frowned. "What happened? We had everything confirmed last week. Apparently another production made promises, got their footage, and disappeared. Now they're suspicious of everyone with cameras." Vanessa checked her watch. "I'd handle it myself, but I've got the network call in 20 minutes. "I'll take care of it," Maria assured her, already mentally rearranging her schedule. "The community council meeting is at 10. I'll head to Southside right after." Vanessa's relief was palpable. "Thank you. If we lose that location, we won't," Maria said with quiet confidence. As she settled at her desk, Maria reflected on how naturally she now stepped into these challenges. Where once she'd sought approval for every decision, she now acted with the certainty that came from understanding both the production's needs and the communities they served. The morning council meeting proceeded smoothly. Maria presented their production schedule for filming in the Washington Heights neighborhood, addressing concerns about traffic disruptions and explaining how local businesses would be compensated for any inconvenience. When one council member expressed skepticism about their intentions, Maria didn't become defensive. "Your neighborhood has been misrepresented in the past," she acknowledged, "which is exactly why Mr. Freeman wants to get this right. We're not here to impose a narrative. We're here to amplify the story you want told." By meeting's end, even the most resistant council members had warmed to their approach. As Maria gathered her materials, Councilwoman Jackson approached her. "You know," the older woman said thoughtfully, "when they said Morgan Freeman was sending his assistant, I expected some Hollywood type who'd talk down to us." Maria smiled. "I spent 7 years serving people at the Meridian. Talking down to others isn't in my nature." "It shows," the councilwoman replied. "You listen differently than most people in your position." The comment stayed with Maria as Curtis drove her to the Southside Community Center. There was something powerful in that observation, that she listened differently because of who she was and where she'd come from. The community center was a well-maintained but aging building in a neighborhood that had seen better days. Inside, a group of concerned residents had gathered, their expressions guarded as Maria introduced herself. "I understand you have concerns about participating in our series," she began, choosing to stand rather than sit behind the table that had been prepared. "I'd like to hear them directly." An older man named Robert spoke first. "Last year, some production came through promising to highlight our youth programs. When the show aired, all they showed was crime statistics and run-down buildings. Made us look like we needed saving instead of support." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. "That's a valid concern," Maria acknowledged, "and unfortunately common in how neighborhoods like yours get portrayed." "So what makes your project different?" challenged a younger woman with skeptical eyes. Maria considered her response carefully. "I could tell you about Mr. Freeman's commitment to authentic representation. I could show you our treatment and filming approach. But honestly, those are just words and papers." She set her portfolio down and moved closer to the group. "What makes us different is that we recognize this neighborhood isn't a backdrop or a symbol, it's your home, and you deserve final approval on how your home is portrayed." Surprise registered on several faces. "Final approval?" Robert clarified. "You mean we get to see what you're putting out before it airs?" "Yes," Maria confirmed. "We'll hold a community screening of the rough cut. If there's anything that misrepresents your reality, we'll address it before the episode is finalized." The skeptical woman crossed her arms. "No production company does that." "We do," Maria said simply, "because we're not just making television, we're documenting real lives and real solutions. Getting it wrong doesn't just hurt our show, it hurts your community." For the next hour, Maria listened more than she spoke. She heard stories of previous media exploitation, of promises broken, of nuances ignored in favor of sensationalism. With each account, her conviction deepened. By the time she left, not only had the community center reconfirmed their participation, but additional residents had volunteered their stories. Maria drove back to the office with a renewed sense of purpose and an idea taking shape in her mind. Back at the production office, she headed straight to Morgan's space, where he was reviewing footage from the previous day's shoot. "How did Southside go?" he asked, looking up from his monitor. "They're back on board," Maria reported, "but it highlighted a larger issue we should address." Morgan gestured for her to continue. "Each community we film in has experienced some form of media misrepresentation," Maria explained. "They agree to participate, but there's an underlying distrust we have to overcome each time." Morgan nodded. "That's the reality of working with communities that have been exploited for dramatic effect. What if we created a formal community engagement protocol?" Maria suggested, the idea crystallizing as she spoke. "A documented process guaranteeing community input, preview screenings before episodes are finalized, and continued relationship after filming concludes." Morgan leaned back, considering her words. "Like a community bill of rights?" "Exactly," Maria said, warming to the concept. "It would streamline our process and build trust before we even arrive. We could make it part of our production identity, something that sets us apart from other documentary series. Develop it," Morgan said without hesitation. "I want to see a comprehensive proposal by next week." The next few days flew by as Maria researched best practices in documentary ethics, consulted with community organizers, and drafted what she began calling the Community Voice Initiative. She worked late into evenings, balancing her regular duties with this new project that increasingly felt like her personal mission. On Thursday afternoon, Vanessa caught her working through lunch at her desk. "Morgan says you're developing some for new community protocol," she remarked, leaning against the doorframe. Maria nodded, expecting resistance from the production-focused producer. "It's a formal structure for community participation throughout our process." To her surprise, Vanessa looked intrigued rather than skeptical. "Show me what you have." As Maria outlined her proposal, Vanessa's expression shifted from professional interest to genuine enthusiasm. "This could be groundbreaking," she admitted. "Not just for this series, but as a model for responsible production. You should present this at the next all-hands meeting." "Me?" Maria asked, startled. "It's your initiative," Vanessa pointed out. "Your vision." The word vision lingered in Maria's mind as she drove home that evening. 6 months ago, she'd been focused solely on survival, on making it through each day, with enough tips to cover bills. Now she was developing initiatives that could potentially influence how an entire industry approached community storytelling. At home, she found Zoe at the kitchen table doing homework. "How was work, Mom?" her daughter asked, used to their evening check-ins. Maria smiled, sitting beside her. "I'm working on something important, something that might help people tell their own stories instead of having others tell stories about them." Zoe considered this with the serious expression she adopted when processing adult concepts. "Like how Kelly's mom always tells everyone I'm underprivileged because it's just you and me, even though I don't feel that way at all." The innocent observation struck Maria with its profound parallel. Exactly like that, baby. Everyone deserves to define their own story. As Zoe returned to her homework, Maria realized that in finding her professional voice, she was modeling for her daughter what it meant to stand in one's truth and advocate for others. That perhaps was the most meaningful aspect of this unexpected journey, showing Zoe that reinvention was possible at any age, that setbacks could become launching pads, and that the qualities others might dismiss could become your greatest strengths. The waitress who once served others now served a greater purpose, and her voice was only growing stronger. 1 year after Morgan Freeman had walked into the Meridian, Maria stood in the center of a bustling film set, clipboard in hand, confidently directing crew members and community participants. What had once been an alien environment now felt like territory she navigated with ease. "We need to reset for another take," called Philip Chen, the director of photography. "Maria, can you check if Ms. Washington is ready for her interview segment?" "On it," Maria replied, already moving toward the small staging area where Elaine Washington, a community elder and civil rights veteran, was waiting. The production team had transformed the community center's multi-purpose room into a temporary studio with lighting rigs, sound equipment, and cameras arranged to capture the intimate conversations that formed the heart of their series. This was the final week of filming for Resilience, American Stories, and the energy on set reflected both exhaustion and accomplishment. "Ms. Washington, are you comfortable? Can I get you anything before we start your segment?" Maria asked, approaching the elegant older woman. "I'm fine, dear," Elaine replied, adjusting her colorful head wrap. "Just making sure I remember all the important points." Maria smiled reassuringly. "Just speak from your heart like we discussed. Your story about organizing the Neighborhood Watch program after the police funding cuts is powerful on its own. No need to embellish or structure it." The transformation of raw community experiences into compelling television had been the most challenging aspect of production. Maria had become the essential bridge, translating production needs to community participants while ensuring that the community's authentic voice remained intact through the filmmaking process. Morgan appeared at her side, script pages in hand. "The network called," he said quietly. "They've seen the rough cut of the first 3 episodes." Maria tensed slightly. "And?" A slow smile spread across his face. "They're calling it groundbreaking. They want to discuss extending the series for a 2nd season, possibly expanding to other cities." The news sent a wave of pride through Maria. What had begun as a 6-episode documentary series might now become an ongoing platform for community stories nationwide. "That's incredible," she said. "The Community Voice Initiative really made a difference in the quality of the material we got. Which is why I want you to co-produce if we move forward with Season 2, Morgan said, his tone matter-of-fact. Maria stared at him. "Co-produce? Morgan, I've only been in this industry for a year, and in that year, you've developed our most innovative production protocol, managed complex community relationships, and helped shape our narrative approach," he countered. "The title would simply reflect the role you're already performing." Before Maria could respond, Vanessa approached with determined steps that always signaled a production issue. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "The mural unveiling. That's supposed to be our closing sequence. The artist just called. There's been water damage to the community center wall. The mural installation is delayed at least 2 weeks." "But we wrap filming on Friday," Maria said, mentally reviewing their tight post-production schedule. "We can't extend the production timeline." "Exactly the problem," Vanessa confirmed grimly. Maria quickly assessed their options. The mural, depicting community heroes alongside current residents, was meant to be the visual culmination of the neighborhood's journey, the perfect closing image for their final episode. "What if we pivot?" she suggested. "Instead of filming the completed mural, we document the community coming together to repair the wall and prepare it for the artist. It's actually a more authentic representation of resilience, the ongoing work rather than just the finished product." Morgan and Vanessa exchanged impressed glances. "That could work," Vanessa acknowledged. "But we'd need to reorganize tomorrow's entire shooting schedule, get permits for the exterior filming." "I'll handle it," Maria said with the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. "The story isn't about perfect outcomes anyway. It's about the process of building and rebuilding." As the day's filming continued, Maria worked her phone and contacts, rearranging permits, coordinating with neighborhood volunteers, and revising call sheets for the next day's shoot. What would have once seemed like an insurmountable crisis now felt like a solvable puzzle. During a brief break, she found herself standing next to Trevor, whose initial hostility had gradually transformed into grudging respect over the past year. "Heard about your solution for the mural situation," he said, sipping coffee from a paper cup. Smart pivot. Coming from Trevor, this qualified as effusive praise. "Thanks," Maria replied. "Sometimes the best stories emerge from the unexpected." "That's what I'm learning from watching you work," Trevor admitted, surprising her with his candor. "I spent 4 years in film school learning technical aspects, but you've got an intuition for the human elements that can't be taught." The acknowledgement from her once harshest critic felt like the closing of a circle. The production team had become something of a family over the past year, dysfunctional at times, but ultimately united in their commitment to the project. After filming wrapped for the day, Maria found Morgan in his temporary office reviewing footage on a laptop. "Everything's arranged for tomorrow's revised shoot," she reported. "The community center is bringing 20 volunteers to help prepare the wall, and I've coordinated with the artist to be there to discuss his vision." Morgan nodded approvingly. "Excellent. You know, when I first offered you this job, I saw potential, but you've exceeded every expectation." "I had a good teacher," Maria replied with a smile. "You had good instincts," Morgan corrected. "I just gave you the space to develop them." That evening, as Curtis drove her home, Maria watched the familiar neighborhoods pass by her window. A year ago, these same streets had seemed filled with obstacles and limitations. Now she saw possibilities, stories waiting to be told, communities, with voices deserving amplification. "Big day tomorrow," Curtis commented, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "The biggest," Maria agreed. "Final day of filming." Must feel good seeing it all come together. Maria smiled, reflecting on the journey. It feels right, like all the pieces finding where they belong. At home, she found Zoe sprawled on the living room floor with a notebook and colored markers. "What are you working on, baby?" Maria asked, setting down her bag. Zoe held up a hand-drawn storyboard. "My own TV show, like yours, but about kids who save the environment. Ms. Patterson says I have a visual storytelling sensibility." Maria laughed, heart swelling at how her daughter's ambitions had expanded alongside her own. Their apartment was the same, but everything else had changed, especially the horizons they both saw before them. Later that night, after Zoe was asleep, Maria reviewed the final shooting script for tomorrow, making notes in the margins. The journey from waitress to assistant, to valued creative contributor, had unfolded with a narrative arc worthy of their documentary series, complete with conflict, growth, and transformation. Tomorrow they would capture the final scenes of their first season. The community would come together, literally preparing a wall to hold their collective story. The metaphor wasn't lost on Maria. How proper preparation and foundation work made beautiful things possible. Her phone chimed with a text from Morgan. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we make your community voice vision a reality." Maria set her script aside and turned out the light, but sleep eluded her. 1 year ago, she'd been fired for standing up for what was right. The action that had seemed to destroy her life had instead redirected it, revealing capacities within herself she might never have discovered otherwise. The script of her own life had taken an unexpected turn, and the reality it had created was better than anything she could have imagined. As she finally drifted towards sleep, Maria wondered what the next season might bring, both for their series and for her own unfolding story. Tomorrow's filming would capture a community coming together to create something beautiful from damaged beginnings. It was, Maria realized, the perfect metaphor for the journey they had all taken together, turning setbacks into foundations for something new, transforming scars into canvases for future possibilities. The Rialto Center for the Arts buzzed with anticipation as Atlanta's film community, network executives and neighborhood residents gathered for the premiere of Resilience: American Stories. Red carpet runners stretched across the historic theater's entrance, where photographers captured the arrival of cast and crew. "Ready for this?" Morgan Freeman asked, standing beside Maria in the quiet backstage area. Maria took a deep breath, smoothing the midnight blue gown she'd purchased for the occasion, her first-ever designer dress. "As ready as I'll ever be. Remember," Morgan said, his eyes crinkling with warmth, "tonight is the culmination of your journey as much as it is about the series." 18 months had passed since that fateful night at the Meridian when Maria had stood between Morgan and harassment. 18 months of transformation, challenges and growth that had carried her from serving tables to co-producing a documentary series that industry insiders were already calling groundbreaking. "Places, everyone," called the event coordinator. "We're starting in 5 minutes." Maria checked her phone one last time. A text from Tasha, "Crush it tonight, producer." Another from the babysitter, "Zoe finally fell asleep. She made me promise to record everything on TV about her mom." The theater lights dimmed as the master of ceremonies welcomed the audience and introduced Morgan Freeman. Applause thundered through the venue as Morgan took the stage, his commanding presence drawing all eyes. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," he began, his distinctive voice filling the space without effort. "When we started this project, we had a simple but ambitious goal: to tell authentic stories of resilience across America, beginning right here in Atlanta. But what makes these stories authentic isn't just what we captured on camera. It's the process through which they were gathered and told." Morgan gestured toward the wings. "I'd like to introduce the person whose vision shaped that process, our co-producer and the architect of the Community Voice Initiative that has transformed how we approach documentary filmmaking, Maria Johnson." The spotlight found Maria as she walked onto the stage, heart pounding yet steps steady. The audience applauded, most unaware of the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. "Thank you," she said, standing beside Morgan at the podium. "When we talk about resilience, we often focus on the outcome, the triumph over adversity. But true resilience lives in the process, in the daily choice to continue forward despite uncertainty." She paused, scanning the audience where community members from each featured neighborhood sat alongside entertainment industry power players. This series honors that process by ensuring the communities we featured had agency in how their stories were told. Each episode you'll see tonight was shaped not just by our production team, but by the people who lived these experiences. After their remarks, Maria took her seat in the front row between Vanessa and Zoe, who had been allowed to stay up for the first episode despite the late hour. The theater darkened completely, and the series title appeared on screen, accompanied by Morgan Freeman's narration. For the next hour, Maria watched with a mixture of professional pride and personal awe as the stories she'd helped shape unfolded. On the massive screen, the camera work was stunning, the narratives compelling, but what moved her most were the authentic voices of community members, ordinary people whose extraordinary resilience shone through in every frame. When the credits rolled, Maria's name appeared, co-producer Maria Johnson. Beside her, Zoe squeezed her hand tightly, beaming with pride. The lights rose for intermission, and Maria found herself surrounded by well-wishers, network executives offering congratulations, community participants expressing gratitude for how their stories had been handled, industry professionals inquiring about her innovative approach to community engagement. As she navigated the crowded lobby, a familiar voice cut through the din. "Maria, She turned to find Edward Pierce, her former manager from the Meridian, standing awkwardly in a rented tuxedo. Beside him was Thomas Daniels, the restaurant's elderly owner. "Edward," she acknowledged, surprised by his presence. "Mr. Daniels." "Remarkable work," Daniels said, genuine admiration in his voice. "When Morgan invited us, I wasn't sure what to expect, but this is something special." Edward shifted uncomfortably. "I owe you an apology, Maria. What happened that night? I made the wrong call." Maria studied the man who had once held such power over her livelihood, who had dismissed her judgment and character with a single decision. Now he looked smaller somehow, less intimidating. "Thank you for saying that," she replied simply, neither accepting nor rejecting his apology. Some chapters needed acknowledgement, but not necessarily reconciliation. "We've implemented changes at the Meridian," Daniels added. "New protocols for supporting staff when they intervene in customer situations. Your situation prompted a complete review of our management practices." The irony wasn't lost on Maria. Her firing had sparked positive change, even in the place that had rejected her. "I'm glad something good came from it," she said. Movement caught her eye, and she saw Zoe waving enthusiastically from across the lobby, where she stood with Morgan Freeman, clearly mid-conversation. "If you'll excuse me," Maria said, "my daughter is calling." As she walked away, Maria felt a strange sense of completion. The circle that had begun 18 months ago with her dismissal from the Meridian had closed, but the closing hadn't brought her back to where she started. Instead, it had spiraled upward to a new plane of possibility. The second half of the premiere showcased the final episode, the one featuring the community mural project that had almost derailed their production schedule. What had seemed like a crisis had transformed into one of the most powerful segments, as residents of all ages came together to repair water damage and prepare the wall for the artist's vision. The episode concluded with a time-lapse of the mural's completion, faces from the neighborhood immortalized in vibrant color. At the after-party, Maria found a quiet moment with Morgan on the venue's balcony, overlooking the Atlanta skyline. "Have news," he said, sipping sparkling water. "The network has officially greenlit Season 2. They want 8 episodes, cities across the country." "That's wonderful," Maria replied, genuine excitement in her voice. "And," Morgan continued, "they specifically requested that you lead the Community Voice Initiative nationwide. They want to make it a cornerstone of their documentary approach going forward." Maria absorbed this new development, its significance settling over her like a warm mantle. What had begun as her personal project had grown into an industry-recognized methodology. "There's more," Morgan added. "I'm launching a mentorship program for non-traditional entrants into the film industry, people with life experience, rather. Then film school degrees, people whose perspectives aren't typically represented behind the camera." Understanding dawned. "Like me," Morgan nodded. "I'd like you to help shape it, to identify candidates with that same spark I saw in you." "What do you think?" Maria looked out at the city lights, thinking of all the unseen talent in communities like those they'd featured. People with stories to tell and perspectives to share, waiting for an opportunity. "I think," she said finally, "that kindness creates ripples we can't foresee." Morgan smiled, understanding her reference to that fateful night at the Meridian. "Indeed it does." Inside, the celebration continued. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a nationwide production to plan, a mentorship program to develop, a second season to conceptualize. But tonight was for honoring the journey. As Maria rejoined the party, finding Zoe animatedly describing her school project to an attentive Vanessa, she felt a sense of profound gratitude. The firing that had once seemed like an ending had been merely the first page of a far more meaningful chapter. Her mother had always told her that when one door closes, another opens. What she hadn't mentioned was that sometimes the new door leads to a room far larger and more wondrous than you could have imagined. A room where your voice not only matters, but creates space for others to be heard as well. Full circle didn't mean ending where you began. It meant recognizing that every ending contains the seeds of a new beginning, and that sometimes losing your place in one story means finding your purpose in a greater one.